this is Marina from Frocks Frolics, and I'm going to show you how to sew the Virginia tunic today. It's for girls from age 2 to 12, the pattern. And we've got an elasticated sleeve, which is really super cute, and it's plain at the top, but any of my patterns which has a puff sleeve, that will also fit in here, so you could use that too if you wanted to. It's gathered across the front and has got this groovy facing in here. That means that your kid can get in and out really fast, especially the little ones. They like to dress themselves and they can do that here. We've got that beautiful panel as well on the back. And the fabrics that you can use for this are either quilting cottons or lightweight jersey or denim, chino, any fabric really, as long as it's not too heavy or too light. And here you can see my fabric, and I'm also using some ribbon to put onto the hem, and I'm showing you later how that works. You need a very slim elastic, matching thread, some buttons, and what I would suggest is a knitted interfacing. That works really well, especially if you're working with jersey. The first step is to take your pattern once it's printed off and check the scale. You also want to make absolutely sure that you print it off at 100% or actual size, so you don't have any accidents with the sizing. Now we're going to just cut all the individual bits out, including the attachment lines. The sleeve has got a yellow flower and the back has a pink flower, so you can sort out your patterns pretty quick sticks, and then they are put together in alphabetical order from A, B, C, D. So here we're doing the sleeve, so A and B is at the top, C and D at the bottom, and all pieces have got a yellow flower, so you know, aha, that is my sleeve. If you're doing one of the bigger sizes, you might want to use the assembly plan that comes with every single pattern file. Let's start with the sleeve. We've got a tunnel for elastic at the hem. That's very, very easy and probably the simplest way of doing this. And we've also got another option for a turned up cuff, which we're cutting 4 times, 2 times for either side. That's joined together and then simply sewn on here, and when it's turned up, it'll give you the same length. And then you've also got the jersey cuff, and the jersey cuff of course is much slimmer because it needs to be stretched on to the width that you have, and it's also just turned up so that we've got a much slimmer or shorter, less wide cuff. The sleeve also has a front marking, which indicates that is the front. It's more scooped. If you get it the wrong way around, the sleeve will tilt towards the back. Also mark the sleeve head. The front overlaps, and we've got a marking as to how far the overlap is, and then the back is just one piece. The shoulder that's attached to the front and back needs to be marked for the front with 1 snip and the back with 2 snips. It's very easy to use them upside down, so once you've put your markings in, you can't do that. If you've put them in the wrong way around, you will notice that you have much less of an overlap here, and the sleeve will not sit as nicely, and also it will slightly hang oddly, so make sure that you watch out there. The front is cut on the fold and has a slit where the yoke comes in the 2 parts, so one is for the left, one is for the right. And then we've got 3 different lengths to choose from: drop, waist, hip length and full length. It's cut on the fold, and the same goes for the back. The back is much slimmer, and please don't gather it right from the side. Move in a little bit. I put that marking there for you. You also got the different lengths again, and it's also cut on the fold. When you're cutting out, you want to make sure that you cut front and back, like I just said, on the fold, and you can also use the layout plan, which is different for the small sizes to the big sizes. The small sizes, of course, are much more economical. And then in the front, you want to maybe snip the top layer to mark where the slit is going to go. Not necessary really at this point, but you can do that. And here you can see the big piece, and it's cut on the fold, so it's now twice as wide. And the back piece, we're just going to snip the center back so that we know, aha, this is one side or the other side, and that determines how much we're going to gather it in. So that's a really important mark. And then we've also do that on the back of the yoke. You want to mark, like I just said, very important, front of the sleeve head, and that's it. Now I would suggest that you leave all the pattern pieces on until you start sewing. You've got the left yoke of the front twice and the right side as well. And then we have got the shoulder here, and we've got that twice and twice in lining. So you've got a pair on the right side and a pair on the left side. That's real important. And then for the facing, we've got one piece, and because I cut everything in two, so I'm just going to throw the one away that I don't need. So that's what we only need once. And also make sure that you mark the back and the front of the shoulder piece, because they're so similar and it's so easy to get them mixed up. So put your snips in here. The preparation really will save you a lot of aggro later if you've just swapped them over. When you're cutting out your interfacing, put the pattern piece face down onto the interfacing with a smooth side up, so that it will actually fit under and stick to the top. And again, it's easy to get those two confused and do the wrong sides. The shoulders, you just need a pair of those, so I need two of those. The yoke, we only need one of them. And then the back, we also need just the one. So once this is cut out, I'm going to iron this on. I think this is the most challenging part of this pattern actually. The rest is so easy. The putting it together is so fast. Anyway, we're going to put the left front onto the violin, just how we're going to iron it on. And I'm also going to mark it here to make sure I know this is the lower part of it, so I don't accidentally turn it upside down. Once the violin is on, or you're interfacing, that can't happen anymore. So it's just for now, just in case the wind blows in all of the table or something. Anyway, I'm doing the back as well. I'm going to take my interfacing, and then I'm going to put my piece, the outside piece, on top. Now I'm ready to iron the interfacing on. If you've got a cheaper interfacing that melts real easy, it's actually a good idea to iron it from the top, and also I can use plenty of steam then, which normally you don't use if you do it from the other side. So now I'm going to put my linings back on top, just so I don't get confused. I'm going to put a pin in the corners where the shoulder piece is going to go. So that is here on the left and on the right. And then on the top left one, it's of course the top left hand corner, and on the right one, it's the top right hand corner. Iron on the violin to your facing piece, and then overlock all the way around. Now we still got to interface the shoulders, so we've got the two pairs, so I just take the top ones here and use the other ones as lining, and then I put my interfacing underneath it and my shoulder over the top, and I iron those on as well. Now I can put the lining on top. The lining usually, I think for most of you, is the same fabric. So now I'm going to just draw where we're going to sew the neckline. This is the neckline, tiny little neckline. And here you can see it goes down. That is the seam allowance where the left and right hand side yoke are going to be attached. So it's important to mark that. So I'm going to pin this as well, and then we're going to sew these two bits together. Keep to the seam allowance of 1 centimeter. All my patterns work with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. You might want to cut back here a little bit, especially if you're using thicker fabric. Now we want to understitch, and that means we are sewing the seam allowance to the lining. So you really want to force it all apart and then stitch on the lining, and the seam allowance lies right underneath it. And you don't need to do all the way to the end. You can't really do that because of this here, and you can also cut that back. So then we'll roll it over and iron it, and you will see it makes it so easy to iron, and it sits so much better, and it will not stretch either, especially if you haven't used interfacing. Quite important. Because of the understitching, this lining might be 2 millimeters further over, so you want to trim that off before you continue on. Move off your lining. Take that shoulder piece, flip it down and pin it on. Oh, we're almost through all the parts where you can get actually confused and mix them up. Once these are done, it's like so quick. Then put your lining over the top, and we're now going to stitch that too as well. And where we get to the corner, because we're going to sew around the corner, some people find it difficult to find the right spot. Just draw 1 centimeter here and 1 centimeter down, and then you know where you have to sew. So you just go to that point and then you go down. You also want to take your lining, the bit that hasn't got any interfacing on, and you want to turn it up 1 centimeter. And then you put a pin in here that will hold it in place so it can't fall down. And then we've got this really nice edge here, and we know exactly where to sew. So here we go, we're going to sew this down now. Get to that point, put your needle down in the fabric, lift up the presser foot, turn it, and then go down. Your stitches. There we go. Now then, up here people usually say, oh, just fold it down, it makes it really nice. But when you use Vilene like I have, or interfacing, it actually becomes really thick. So you want to cut across that corner but leave the lining standing, and then we're folding it down and we can turn it and it will look absolutely fantastic, I guarantee you. It's a really good trick. You might want to take a pin to move out the corner. And there you go. Isn't that something? That's really nice. You can now understitch this as well. You don't have to, you could just press it. Just press it if you're in any way unsure where to stitch. It means the seam allowance is going to be stitched to the lining again, but truly if you find that difficult, just leave it and just give it a good press as your next step. And then I'm also going to, just while I'm here, iron up that seam allowance all the way across. We've already turned it up and sewn it in like that, so we can now also iron it. And then I give the whole piece a good iron, cut away any excess that's standing over, just from the lining now, mind, just from the lining, never from the shell fabric. Now I'm going to put the right side on as well, and I just want to show you here, because we've got the curve of the armhole, that when you put this on, you want to make sure that actually it's not right on the side, but it's so that at a centimeter you have got the fabrics right on top of each other. That's real important, so you might want to mark that one. I would suggest actually that you always sew from the interfacing side. It's much easier. We're doing the same here. We're ironing up the lining, and now we're going to just sew it down. And when that is done, we do the same as we did on the other side. We're going to cut away the corner with the interfacing on to make it flatter. And then we can also cut away the top a little bit. You could layer that if you wanted to. You can do that on all the pieces, especially if you're working with chino or denim. Here it's not so necessary, but the heavier the fabric, the more important that becomes. Now I'm going to fold it in. And I've done my front. It looks stunning. Right, now we're going to do the back. We take the front piece now, and we're going to fold that one down. Okay, so there's the piece with the Vilene on it. So now we're going to fold that one down and sew it on. You're going to get so addicted to these. They're so quick to make. As long as you mark front and backs and you don't get them confused, you could be done in no time. Very quick. So we're going to put the lining over the top. And now we're going to sew across the top as well. Ta-da! Magic. And you're going to cut back. Quilting cotton doesn't really need it, but you know, denim, like I just said, truly would. And again, we can understitch this. Understitching here is really, really easy, of course, because you're dealing with a straight line. So I'm going to sew the seam allowance here onto the lining. And when that is done, cut off your threads, press it. It's just beautiful. Beautiful. Right, now let's make the front and the back. Let's start with the front and put on that facing. So we need to just pinpoint the spot where it needs to go and pin it to. Remove your pattern piece. Now we're going to mark where we're going to sew. So that's my center line down. And then just mark on either side, although you don't really need to mark it. Important is that you have a tip that you can cut into in a minute. And now we're going to stitch down with a small stitch, I would say 1.5. See how long that takes me to get down? And we're going to now sew a tip into this. So you can see me going over a little bit. Needle down. I'm also locking in my stitches. I don't want this to fray ever. So now I'm coming back the other side. The slimmer actually the better. The distance, like 4 millimeters, is absolutely fine. It doesn't need to be wider than that. Now I'm going to take my scissor and cut right through the center, and we're going to cut all the way to that tip there. Brilliant. Just don't be scared, just cut all the way to the tip. Now we're going to press it, just press it up from either side a little bit so it's easier to turn. And now I'm just going to turn it to the inside. Easy peasy. There we go. Turn it to the inside, and then we're just going to give it a good press again. Some people might want to top stitch this. I think it would cheapen the look. I don't like the top stitching there at all. I'm just leaving it as it is, and it's not going anywhere. So just give that a press. Look at that. Now I'm going to insert some gather threads. That means a very long stitch, the longest you have on your sewing machine, and leave the threads hanging. So the first line of stitching is going to be just next to the edge, really, about 4 millimeters down, and then we do another one foot width from that. And what that will do is give you the perfect stitching position for the 1 centimeter down. It'll be right bang in the center of those two lines, so you get perfect gathers. And we do the same on the front. We put the gather threads in. So I'm now picking up the under threads and wrapping them in a shape of 8 around my needle or pin, sorry. And then from the other side, I'm going to pull just the under threads. Yeah, don't pull them all together. Pull them just a little bit, just as much as I think it might need. This is just a bit of pre-work, if you will. And then I do the same on the other side. I take pin vertical here, put it in, secure one side of the thread so it can't go anywhere, wrap it around in a figure of 8 again, and then we go to the other side and pick up those gather threads and we pull those, and this will be how it overlaps in the front and you can't even see the opening. Now I'm going to do exactly the same on the back. Now we can put the back onto the yoke. Yoo-hoo! So put it as it should be and then just flip it over, grab just the shell, that's the outer fabric, the one with the violin on or the interfacing, turn it round, and we're going to pin this together, and we're going to adjust our gathers just so they fit on, and then we're securing them on the other side as well with that figure of 8. And now we can just sort of make sure that all the gathers are in position, that they look good, distribute them really evenly, and then we can pin it. And you can already see by the pins, they are right bang in the center of those two stitching lines. It's great. Now we're going to do the front. So put the front on in the same way. Now here it's slightly different. We've got this seam allowance already folded up, and the seam as well gives us a beautiful line. You just make sure that yours sits right next to it. Put a vertical pin in so it can't go anywhere. It's just so easy like that. You can also see exactly where to start, so they are the same height, because that's always the problem, that when you have a closure in the front and you've got something going underneath it, that it's not the same height. So now I'm just pulling my gather threads and make sure that they're very evenly distributed, and then I do the other side as well, and then we're going to pin those on as well. This is what it looks like now. We've got it all attached apart from the lining, of course. Distribute your gathers a little bit better when you're on the actual sewing machine. That's what I always do. You know, I do it really roughly before, and then when I sew it, I've got all the tension. One hand holds it taut, and that way with the right hand I can use a pin to evenly distribute. It's a really good little trick. When it comes to sewing the front bit on, it's really cool because you've got that extra centimeter, and you will see as I get to it now how easy it is then to gauge where you have to go. You just go right underneath it. Make sure that the seam allowance here, mine is almost, see, I almost forgot. No, it needs to be folded out, so it's like that. There we go. Now we can remove all the gather threads, so that'll take 5 minutes. And next we're going to press it. Lots of people don't like pressing over pleats or gathers. You have to really iron over that, or at least steam it, because you need some structure here so that when you're pinning in, you're facing on the inside or the lining, that it works. It's really important that you press this down. If you don't like pressed gathers, you can always iron them out later again. So we do that on the front and the back. Now we can just turn this in. Also, if you have very thick fabric, you might just want to overlock the edge at the back and then stitch in the ditch, so to speak, and that will make it a little bit lighter and flatter. But here for my quilting cotton, this is perfect. I'm going to do the same on the front. Now, because we've got multiple layers of fabric, it makes very good sense to make it a little bit flatter by cutting the inner part, that's the interfacing part, off. Tuck it all in. It's not so hard because we've already pre-ironed this, so it's really easy. And that's it. It looks gorgeous. Now we want to just top stitch it, and we start well on one side of the yoke, and then we're going to sew all the way around. Very important is that you move out those pins. If you don't want to do it without it somehow being attached, you can always baste it if you like. I just move the pins out as I hit them, actually, so that the stitch line is even. And then you go up, and as you get to the corner, when you turn in there and you want to go down the other side, very often your machine will get stuck and it looks horribly homemade with tiny little stitches. So in my case, I'm just moving over because I've got that same problem and I've got a very good machine. So I'm moving it over and doing it. Now I want to show you a little trick how you can get past this without having to, you know, move it over and not knowing how much. And that is, you thread up a needle with a double thread. You go straight through the corner, and then you've got something that you can pull as you go around the corner, and that will give you the perfect corner, which looks like a store-bought item, which is what we're after. In fact, we want it to look nicer, don't we, than store-bought. So now, as I sew down the other side, I really pull this so I get an even stitch, because nothing worse than having like these tiny stitches. In fact, my stitch length on this is 3.5. All done, looks spiffing. I am very pleased with myself, and I can move on to do my side seams. So overlock both sides first, and then we're going to do the side seam. And down here you can see that little corner. Now why do I have this corner? So that when the hem is turned up, it actually lines up. If you didn't do that and you went out, it would be too much and it would be really difficult in that area to get it all under. That's why we do it, and that's why I have to keep it in. So now all I have to do is stitch it down, and once that's done, I can also cut across there so that when I iron it, it's easier and flatter anyway. So just do that and then iron it all out. Beautiful. Almost there. Now we can do our beautiful hem. First we have to overlock it, and then we turn it up 1 inch. That's 2.5 centimeters or 2.6. Anyway, something like that. So you just want to iron that up all the way around, and then we're going to stitch right there on the center of the overlocking. Make very sure that the distance that is marked on the needle plate, say if that's 2.5, then take that 2.5 all the way around. Just don't concentrate necessarily on the overlocking or the serging, just concentrate on that marker. And now I'm going to put over a red ribbon. I could leave it like that, but now for the ribbon it's totally easy because I can just place the ribbon so it just covers that first initial stitch line, which I know is totally at the right distance from the hem line. So all I have to do is go around doing that, and it will not wobble up and down. It'll be absolutely perfect. So you do that all the way around, and then as you get to the end, you cut it off. I start of course on a side seam and I just tuck it in and I sew over it. It's so simple. It's really, really simple. Then you want to lift it over and you want to do the top edge. Now for the top edge, make very sure that you really stretch it as you go, because that's where it kind of wants to shift and shimmy. So you really hold it really taut as it goes through the sewing machine, and that will give you a perfect result. But I am not done. I'm going to put on another ribbon. I got really carried away actually. I love this. So the ribbon just overlaps a little bit the side seam so that my fold in the end sits exactly on the side seam that I've got here. And this time I'm measuring from the lower end because I obviously don't have a stitching line, and mine is 6.5 centimeters. So I go all the way around, just making sure that the top edge is 6.5 centimeters. That could be different to what you're doing because it depends on the width of the lace and where you want it, of course. Then you cut it off at the end, tuck it in, stitch it down, and do the same as you did on the lower one. Just lift it up, go and stitch the top part and really stretch it as you go, and it'll be absolutely beautiful. Now we're going to do the sleeve. We have got some elastic that we need to put in, and on the sleeve pattern it actually tells you exactly how long it needs to be. So you want to cut it off to that length, and then you cut yourself a second bit. Grab your sleeve, and we're going to turn up the sleeve now. That's just because it's now the right point to do it. It's really easy. Now you might have an elastic that's slightly slimmer or slightly wider. The important thing is that when you put your elastic in, it has room to move. There needs to be a little bit of wiggle room. My distance here is 1.5 centimeter for me, and my actual elastic is 1 centimeter. So that means that these extra 5 millimeters are very necessary, because by the time we top stitched it, that's also another 2 millimeters. So it only got wiggle room of about 2 millimeters in there. Okay, so we turn that up and turn it up again. And now we're going to do the other side as well. And I turn that up and then up again, exactly the same width, because it depends on your elastic really. And then you want to draw around the sleeve head where the gather line has to go. It needs to be exactly 1 centimeter from the edge, because we're going to stitch exactly on that. It's not like you want to gather the top, you just want to hold it in so that you get a perfect sleeve that's easy to put in, because sleeves really aren't that easy. You need a really big stitch length again. It's just like a gather thread, but here it is important that you have the right distance. It also gives you like a marker, if you will, where to sew, because the sleeve head is the hardest to get under. Now comes the fun part, and we are only sewing down the first turn in, not turning it totally up, because then we couldn't get the elastic in, right? So just the one little turn. Also, you might have seen here, I've overlocked the sides. That's very important, obviously, before you do it. Then I iron my sleeve flat first, and then I iron it apart. That way it'll look really super. And I've also now turned up the hem, because I didn't want it to like be ironed out again. The whole point of ironing it in the beginning is so that it's easier to sew later. Now we're going to steam in the sleeve head. So important. If you're using polyester fabric, this might not work so well. Any of the natural fabrics, this will work. And then I steam with lots and lots of steam before I even put the iron on it, just so the fibers can come together more. That's what you do. You steam it in and then you iron it in until it sort of curves up. And here you can see the right side already looks bigger than the left, where it's steamed in, and actually makes it significantly smaller, and that's of course much easier to put in. Lots of you will struggle with sleeves and say, I can't get it under. Well, like this you really can. It should really come up like that. That's what you want. If it looks like that, then it'll be really easy to put in. Now the next thing is to pin all the way around. Some people might not want to do that, but do it without pinning then. Turn your sleeves so that when you're working, you can just put this under the sewing machine real easy. And we want to stitch close to the edge, but we don't want to start on the seam, because that's going to be really, really thick. So you want to leave your opening for the elastic some other place, like that. Grab the elastic now, and we're just going to basically put it through the tunnel. And you will notice then that it does need that wiggle room. If it's too tight, it's no fun doing it, and it won't look as nice. And then on the other side, you pull it out, make sure it's not twisted. And then we want the elastic to overlap by about 1 centimeter. So pull it out like that, and then I'm going to put a pin in here so it can't move, and then I'm going to sew it together. So I'm going to do a stitching line down either side. It's a bit fiddly, and I'm afraid you don't see very much of it. And then I can also cut this back if I want to, so it doesn't get caught anywhere. Let it slip in. Put a pin in the gap. And then we want to close that gap, and that's my sleeve done. Beautiful. Now I can put my sleeve in. On this side I have already put it in, and it should slightly tilt to the front, and it should be totally smooth. It's just like such a lovely moment when you've got your sleeves in. Make sure that the front snip is facing the front. This is how I do it. Pull it through to the other side, and then pin it to the underarm seam and the sleeve head. And then we're going to pin the sleeve in. And what's very important with a sleeve is that in the lower area you don't really want, any extra there. It needs to be brought in flat, but you want to put your fingers underneath it and kind of like roll it over. That is important. So just get your hands in there and then pin it. And at the top it will always feel like there's a little bit too much. Now, because you've steamed it in, it'll be absolutely fine and you won't have that problem. But make sure that you don't push it over the edge and think, oh, it's too much, because no, it isn't. In fact, I think they could have all done with more ease, these sleeves, but I know how difficult they are to get in if they have more ease. So this is a really well-fitting sleeve for this. So I've done that purposely so it's easier to put in, and I think for a top it's alright. If this was a coat it would need a lot more ease. So you do the same on the other side. Just come on down and just fit it in. Then you want to check that your sleeve tilts slightly forward, not backwards. You can always like move the sleeve edge a little bit if you like, but it should come out perfect. So once that's done, boy oh boy, we're ready to sew it in. And with this you again help yourself by using one of the pins you take out to just smooth it in, hold the fabric in place to go all the way around. This is so much easier because it's been steamed in. If I didn't do this, it would be even hard for me. Now finally we can do the buttons. All you have to do is mark them. We can of course use poppers as well. I'll show you an example in a minute. But if you're using the buttons and they are, you know, whatever size they are, you don't want them to hang over the edge, so you put them on, and wherever the little holes are, the furthest to the right, that's where you need to start your buttonhole. And in my case that was 1.5 centimeters. Of course it's marked on your pattern, but I never really use that. I just go by the button size I have because that gives me a better indicator. Now my button is 1.2 centimeters, so I need 1.5 at least to get it in properly. So now I've sewn in my buttonholes, and I just go to the furthest corner of my buttonhole with my thread, and I'm going to poke through there and sew my button on. The important thing when you sew on a button is that you have a little bit of room so that the other fabric isn't like flattened down and just pulled down by a button that's too tight. So have your thumb under there, and then when you do your last little bit of going through, you wrap it around to do like a stem, like a little mushroom we used to call it when I did my apprenticeship, and that will guarantee a really nice flat look. It almost looks like the button floats on top, and that's what you want to have. Secure and do up your button. Now the next button we do exactly the same. And that's it, the top is finished. Just one more thing, if you don't like buttons, you can use cam snaps, and how to do that I'm showing you in a very short clip, which you can also access on my website. Here's another example where I've used a two-way stretch jersey, also absolutely fab. There's so much you can do with this pattern. And a big thank you to all the ladies that were in the testing group from our Facebook group, which you can also find through the link in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!